for us to nurture the better parts of human nature. Because throughout time there has always been a challenge to try and civilize human beings. We all know that within us that there is this potential to do wrong, the potential to want to dominate others, to be selfish, to have it our way, to benefit at the expense of the loss of others. And the project of civilization is very much about creating a structure which makes it easier for people to be good. Now, even in societies where we achieve that, even when we go in the right direction, there are always aberrations, there are always times when we fail, there are times when there are blind spots, there are times when we do things that we're not sensitive enough to the interests and values or feelings of others. That can always happen, but nonetheless we can still recognize that there are particular times in history when a civilization starts to grow and flourish. It provides a means by which society offers people the chance to have a good life, to have a life in peace and harmony, to have opportunity for flourishing as individuals, as families, as communities, as a society. However, we have lived through, I suppose, what we would call Christendom or Western culture. Now, in the history of cultures, this is seen throughout time, that there are people who just study this. Arnold Toynbee, for example, studied over 20 different civilizations, and he saw that there's a life cycle. There's a life cycle from the start of a culture where people come together over a shared set of values, and those values give a foundation on which people can start to work together, can have a stronger community, can support each other, and find a way to flourish. So Christianity did that. It was after the collapse of the Roman Empire and the years of the centuries of uncertainty. It was when people in Europe coalesced around the values of Christianity that led to them founding Western civilization. And the genius of Western civilization is often identified as built on the recognition of the dignity of every human person. It's that unique value that makes Christianity special, that makes the West special. It has been a long journey, and typically what happens in any culture when they find a set of values that allows them to flourish, they get to a stage of flourishing and prosperity, and people start to forget what the foundational values were that gave that stability. Now, in Pope Benedict's second encyclical, there's a really nice summary of that progression of what's happened in Western civilization. He identifies the start of the collapse of this unity. So we had this unifying vision built on the dignity of the human person. Of course there were blind spots, of course there were things that went wrong, but it was really with Pope Benedict identifies the Reformation as the start of this crumbling of the West. Toynbee and others have identified that typically a civilization will last about 1,000 years. That's how much, from birth to growth to flourishing, there then comes a period of decay and death. And another Toynbee and many others have said similar words, but ultimately a society ends not by murder, but by suicide. It's really within a society that we start to decide, listen, we've lost the will to live. And that is quite an accurate description in the West. If we look at the birth rates, for example, I think the birth rates now in the West are typically below 1.5. That means women typically will have, in their lifetime, will have 1.5 children. To sustain a population, you need at least 2. So even in terms of that, we are on a pathway for suicide. Sorry, I need to do my things in the right direction too. So what can we do in this? Well, faith offers a perspective, an example, to try and promote things which sustain the better parts of our nature. St. Paul, I suppose, encapsulates the importance of the examples that we see around us in our civilization. And when in Philippians he says, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Because the human person, we do have this lower nature, we do have this animal nature within us, but we also have these wonderful higher faculties, the capacity to reason, the intellectual life, that call us to be greater. But this other part of us dragging us down to be more animalistic. So when culture changes and it starts to promote ways of living that drag us down to the animal level, this is when you see the promotion of appetites. And pretty much we live in a society now where, just about every possible appetite is seduced to take more and more of a grip over our lives. I often say to my children, these signs that are up there, buy now and pay later, it's such an amazing trick of our society. Like, wow, have an amazing time just now, satisfy every appetite that you have as the animal human person. But we forget that as we hand ourselves over to this way of living, we become enslaved to those appetites, and we lose the strength of the higher faculties that make the human person such a valuable, priceless, and in fact the Christian faith and other faiths identify that it's of such high value because we are made in the image of God. So there can be nothing more profound than recognizing that every human person is important because they're made in the image of God. So this project of civilization, I'm afraid we're at the end of that 1,000 years. In fact, we're over the end of the 1,000 years. We saw in the 20th century how the rise of totalitarian systems that try to destroy humanity in many ways, that try to make the human person just a malleable unit within this overarching goal of the direction of tyrants, basically, who wanted to take power to themselves. Now, if we're living in a society, that's one of the challenges that we have, is we are trying to pass on values to people in this society. So all of us here, I'm still, when I think about, we have training programs about the development of the baby in the womb, for example. And when we look at those, I think it's absolutely shocking to me that anyone could actually think it's acceptable just to destroy that life. I just find it absolutely shocking. But if I say that, if I explain that to a school, or we send our speakers into schools, children as young as 13 and 14 are absolutely radicalized. They would tear you limb from limb if they had the chance. So they've been so convinced that those who are against abortion are against human rights, they're against women. And when you try to reason with them, you find that it's just almost impossible. Now, Jonathan Swift once said, "Reasoning will never make a man correct an ill opinion which by reason he never acquired." And that's what we're facing. Modern psychology and science has come to such a profound understanding of the human person that we've actually seen that we now have some tools which allow us to identify why this might be so. Why is it that when we are absolutely convinced, we can show the science, we can show the reason, why is it that people still will not listen to us? Well, I'll just briefly, I would have shown you a nice picture of this to try and illustrate it. What the modern psychologists are finding, and the study of how the human mind works, If you imagine an elephant with a rider on top of the elephant, so imagine that. You've got an elephant and you have a rider. What the scientists are saying now is the part of the human person which is capable of reasoning, judging, being logical, that is like the rider. So he's the rider and he's sitting on top of an elephant. The elephant is like the passions within the human person. It's the emotions, the appetites. And what they find is it's much easier for us just to go along with the emotions and the appetites, because it's such a powerful part of the makeup of the human person that we just go along with that. But it's really difficult for us to start to apply the reason and the logic of the rider part of the human person to try and drag us back onto track. And one of the things they've found, especially in marketing and advertising, it's wonderful what they can do, except they pretty much use it to make these appetites all-consuming. You know, people are absolutely, and even in terms of the use of your time, you know, people who create Google and social media, they've done it in such a way that it gives you a dopamine shot every time you look at a post. So you'll see kids in the train and walking about. I now visit relatives and they'll have a child, maybe 14, 15, 16, come in, not say hello, sit on the couch, hold up a phone in front of their eyes and just go like that, flick all through it. They're getting short dopamine bursts every time they get one. And this is basically an appetite that is being fed all the time. And it means it makes these human beings almost incapable of actually lifting their head to say hello. So what chance do we have if we want to try and get to them and say, do you know what? Mankind is facing a shocking future if we do not change, if we do not protect lives that are in the womb, and if we do not sustain the family where children are born and give us some tenable possibility of a flourishing future. Sorry, I keep flicking the wrong way in my phone. When you do photographs, you ever do that? I always go the wrong way. Anyway, so there are many studies of this in action. You know, so some I would just mention are worth looking at. Christopher Dawson, for example, the great Catholic social historian, looked at the rise and the fall, and now as we head towards it, the collapse. I've always found it interesting how profound the understanding of those Catholic writers at the start of the very beginning of the 20th century, they seem to see the writing on the wall. You think, what, in 1930 it was as bad as that? Because we all think, oh yeah, it all went wrong in 1960. You know, but it was going wrong for a long time. And we're getting to this stage where society is in trouble, and it's not to be unexpected. And one of the points that Pope Benedict and many of these other writers get to is the fact we are getting to the end of this period of Christendom. And John Paul II used to talk about the new springtime that was coming. Pope Benedict was a bit more precise on the bit of the dark winter that was coming before the springtime. But nonetheless, the point for us to bear in mind is that it's what we do now that will determine what the civilization of the future is going to look like. So it might look, things might look bad. We're at the end of, so I've painted a pretty bad picture, and I realise now as I ponder it. We've had this time of Christendom. It was a challenge, but we had principles that have allowed the possibility of human flourishing and the respect for every individual human life. That's sort of over now. But when it's over, it doesn't mean that our society is going to disappear. The collapse of the Roman Empire did not mean that all the Romans and those who were under the subjugation of the Romans all disappeared. They had to find new ways of living, new ways of forming political or civil institutions. And that's what we are facing just now. Now, Toynbee in this study of civilization makes a very important point that's very significant for us, and that is civilizations are not created by everyone, but typically what you have is a creative minority. And if any of you have read the writings of Pope Benedict, he writes a lot about Europe and about the development of Europe, and he talks a lot about creative minorities. And it was only when I went back and read Toynbee I realised what Pope Benedict was alluding to, because he said Catholics now need to be the creative minorities. But it's not just Catholics, I suppose, it's all people of goodwill, those who still have the capacity to reason and are not just drawn down this perspective of, hey guys, let's just go on social media and have a great time, or go out to the clubs and just satisfy every urge of the appetites. But there's the possibility of those who are capable of thinking, actually, what brings about good living? What is it that allows us to fulfill our nature, the higher dimensions of the human nature, allow those to flourish, rather than being dragged down to live, I'm afraid to say it, like animals, just controlled by our appetites. Now, this gets me to abortion, and I'm saying about the culture in general, but for me now, working at SPUC and having the sort of challenge and privilege of becoming the CEO, when we look at abortion in particular, it's an egregious example of all that's gone wrong in our culture. And a sort of exercise I've done just to try and get this home to people, because there are lots of problems in society. We just have to turn on the news every night. There are lots of challenges. There are lots of people living in suffering. There are lots of people who need help, and we need to help them. Typically, I find that those involved in the pro-life movement are also the people helping in those things as well. They're helping at soup kitchens, they're helping at food banks, they're donating to charities that support international development. Typically, that's what you find. But in the reality of the scale of what we're talking about, I've gone through and just looked at different threats to human life around the world. So when you look at deaths from cancer, for example, so when you look at cancer, shocking thing, probably all of us know someone or someone in our family has been afflicted by cancer, lost their life to cancer. Around the world every year, it accounts for something like 7 million deaths. Similarly for hunger, I always find it shocking that in our lives, when I say this often to my kids, you can eat as much as they want any time of the day. In fact, my house, the kids are still mostly at home. In the middle of the night, I can hear them going in and out of the kitchen and open fridges and all that. They can eat as much as they want at any time. We live now like the kings of the past. We live in absolute abundance. Yet, there are still people in the world who cannot get access to food, and it accounts for the death of about 8 million people a year because of malnutrition. So it's a shocking indictment of our age that in a world of plenty, where there's enough to go around, our systems of sharing that around are not working and people are dying of hunger. It is shocking, it's a terrible thing, and we have to support works to remedy that. But when we come to abortion, this could be conservative estimates, because it comes from the UN, the United Nations. They estimate that there's roughly 56 million abortions every single year. 56 million. So you're talking about getting on to near the population of England. That's the number of lives lost every single year. And we're talking about this going on for the last 40 years. It's a staggering. There's no affliction, no atrocity, no natural disaster that comes close to the scale of the lives that are lost by abortion. That is the challenge to our age. Now, one of the fruits of a good culture, a healthy culture, is you get great literature, and sometimes great literature inspires us. Tomorrow my son has arranged for me to go and see Lord of the Rings. They're showing it again now, they're trying to get people back to the cinema, so it made me think of this. There's a brilliant quote in it, for those who've who've seen the film or read the books. And it's when Frodo, the small hobbit, he's in this absolutely daunting adventure up against the forces of darkness, and it's absolutely terrifying. And he says to the wise old Gandalf, "I wish it need not have happened in my time." So he's looking at the fate. There's just no way he can take on the forces of evil in his time. And Gandalf said to him, "So do I, and so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us." And we're in the same situation. What we've got to do is decide, what are we going to do with the time that we have right now, when we've been born at the end of a civilization. Typically at the end of a civilization, the changes are very rapid, but out of it comes a new civilization, a new way of living, and we are facing a time when we're up against the greatest destroyer of life the world has ever seen. This is our time, and it's for us to decide, what are we going to do about it. Times like this have come and gone throughout history. Every generation has something to face up to. Every generation has some evil to face. And for us, as I said, there are many. We have to work on lots of them, but those of us who are working in the pro-life fight, the struggle against abortion is the looming challenge, and yet it's so difficult to convince people to be involved. I'm often inspired by William Wilberforce, because he faced a similar challenge, because at the time in 1789, he was facing a slave trade that was absolutely embedded in our society. Everyone, church-going people, philanthropists, great businessmen, loved their children, loved their communities. They thought nothing was wrong with slavery, quite happy to go along with it. But William Wilberforce recognized in every human being that dignity that needed to be respected. And in 1789, before the House of Commons, he said, "The nature and all the circumstances of this trade are now laid open to us. We can no longer plead ignorance. We cannot evade it. We cannot turn aside." Now, it looked impossible then for him, but it was less than 20 years later. So that was the first debate in Parliament. It took him 20 years, but 20 years later, the Atlantic slave trade was criminalised. It was abolished. His absolute determination. Now, there were three main things, I think, the lessons to learn from Wilberforce's life, an example of what they did. There was a very well orchestrated effort within Parliament and with politicians, led by Wilberforce. There was a very well coordinated effort in society, led by many, including Thomas Clarkson. And at the same time, there was a religious revival. People of faith took the issue seriously. Those three components came together to allow that terrible trade of misery to be brought to a halt. And it was now historians are saying that, slavery was universal for since the beginning of recorded history. But it was this idea within Christendom, the idea of the dignity of every single human being, that made the eradication of it possible. And it's that same value that will make the eradication of abortion possible. Now, the slide I'd like to have shown you was that of the iceberg, because as you all learned in school, I remember my teacher in primary 5 showing us the picture of the iceberg. There's a wee point above the sea line, but below that you've got this massive structure, and that's pretty much what success is like. Success is just that bit that pops above the surface every now and again, but below the surface you've got all the persistence, the sacrifice, the hard work, the good habits that you put into practice, the failures that you learn from, and all of those build the foundations on which eventually success comes. That's what we need to do in the pro-life movement. That's what we need to do if we want to save all these valuable lives that have been lost in the millions every single year. We need to put all that effort, all our dedication, our persistence, learn from the failures, and we need to bring about success. So I think what we need to do in the pro-life movement, what I want to do now that I've taken up the leadership of SPUC, is to show people that, I suppose this is a response to a feeling I've had as I've gone around the country chatting to people about the pro-life movement over the last many, many years, actually. There's a sort of feeling that it's such an ingrained practice. Everyone's for it. Every celebrity, every politician, every news channel, every newspaper, they're all pretty much for it. We can't win it. Can't win it now, but maybe someone, sometime in the future, they'll come along, a Wilberforce will come along and fix it. I sort of want to now say, well, okay, there are people, if we look at businesses just nowadays, there's a lot of, if you read business sort of literature, which I do quite a lot, there's guys out there, and what their approach to things is, like, if there's something someone has done once before, how did they do it? Go and find out exactly how they did it, and now let us do it. That's what they do. So the guys who created Facebook, Google, Microsoft, that's what they did. And out of nothing, they created massive empires. They found ways to do it. They found a pathway to what I would call a winnable game. And that's what we are now faced with in the pro-life movement. We need now to think, how have people done it before? Who out there in the world is winning over the values and the support of wider society? How did they do it? And let us do it. So it's creating a winnable game that's the key to what we need to do in the pro-life movement now. One of the things, just to get back to the idea of the importance of the creative minorities, one of the important things about the creative minorities is it doesn't actually need to be that many people. Now, there's lots of literature around this and lots of studies, and it varies quite widely. But it would surprise you, though, to know how small the percentage that brings about the complete change of society can be. It can typically be between 3% and 10%. So if you have a particular population, I don't know if that's me hitting that or talking too loud. Typically, if you can galvanize the support of a small part of a community or a society, that grouping, this creative minority, can tip the field in your favor. And suddenly, before you know it, you're building a momentum. So one of the challenges for us is identifying what are the culture-shaping forums in our society where we can take hold of the levers and start to change them. Where can we align our efforts and be involved at where people learn their values? How can we do that? Now, for SPUC, I've identified 3 key areas of work that I think we will have to operate to bring that about. But all of it is working within this idea of what I would say is a culture. Sorry, that was me. I should be on questions by now or soon. One of the things we need to do is identify how we align all of our efforts along 3 key areas. One is influence. I'll break that down in a second. The other is legal, and the other is services. Now, the influence, there are particular areas of society which have massive influence on how people live, what they think, what their opinions are. So in academic life, political life, in our education, particularly in universities and schools, in our churches, in the media. So one of the things we are doing in SPUC now is going into those areas and providing the training and the input to pull together what might be a minority, but it's a minority that can start to pull this lever, move things in the right direction. if I can, I'll maybe try and fit in some of the activities we do. Tom Rogers, just for example, in your Peterborough diocese, has been involved in a project for the last 3 years, for example. So SPUC will have a film, a real film, coming out. We're hoping to get it on something like Prime Video or Netflix. It will be coming out next February, but it's a pro-life film. And it's just a small contribution, but it's the sort of contribution we need to do to show that it is possible, to show that we can work and create things that are positive for our culture. In legal terms, we now have a task force targeting politicians to try and win them over to key arguments that are really convincing, especially now that a lot of the work we do shows our counsellors find that between 60 and 70% of women who've had an abortion have been coerced. So it's not been their choice, it's been someone else's choice. 60 to 70%. Now think of all the hurt and suffering that's out there because of that. So it's not this, and many, even the ones who haven't been coerced, very often afterward think, they were absolutely desperate. They couldn't see a way out of it, and they chose abortion, and they didn't realise often that's a pathway to terrible suffering as well. So we've got a task force focusing on how we can convince politicians of that. And then we have services to try and give the support. So there is, because of abortion, there is an ocean of suffering in our society. So we have particular ways of supporting women. So we have Arch, which is a helpline for women who've had an abortion. That can be phoned, every day of the year. We have a team working on that. We also have those women who come to us say, we need a forum to tell people about this. We feel we need to share our experience. So we've created a platform for that called Her Voice. But we also know that it's out of this desperation that people turn to abortion. Sometimes they just needed someone to say, listen, I'll help you. I'll be there for you. I'll listen to you. I can give you a bit of advice. So we've set up we don't have the resources to do it right across society. We do work with other organisations that do it, but we've set up an initiative called Alma Mater. Now, Alma Mater is for university students who have a crisis pregnancy. And just this week, we've given out 2 grants to young women, but we also give them advice and we give them support, someone that they can turn to. So by doing that, we have the opportunity to, again, start to change as a creative minority, show that there's an alternative, there's another way of doing things. Now, I better bring this to a close. I'm halfway through my slides, so I better not finish them all. I've pulled together really most of the things I wanted to say. One of the ways of having a look at the health of the pro-life movement is comparing it to other causes. If you look at, and so just what I'm not here fundraising, by the way, but just to let you know, if you look at all of the income for all the pro-life groups in the UK in a year, it's something like £10 million. That's all the pro-life groups. If you look at the RSPB, so that's protection of birds. I love birds. We set up bird tables and all that. My kids like saving birds' lives and all the rest of it. Birds are wonderful. But they bring in 150 million a year. 150 million just for birds. Just that one. Now there's the other bird charities, but just that one, 150 million. 15 times as much is donated to try and save the lives of the unborn. That just gives you an idea of the scale of how we've got our priorities wrong. I'm from an animal, a family of animal lovers. We always had cats and dogs, and I used to keep canaries when I was a wee boy and things like that. I spent many of my summers running after my cat in the garden trying to get a bird out of his mouth. But I'm all for looking after animals and birds, but let's get our priorities right. So we need something radical to say in our church communities and wider society. We need to put this back at the heart of our concerns in society. There are many, many lives being lost. There are many women feeling that they've nowhere else to turn except to have an abortion. They've run out of opportunities. This is the only solution that they can see, and they need us to show them that it's different. Now, two last points really. One is that there's a well-understood movement of values in society. It's quite a well-understood process. You can see it in lots of forums, lots of new ideas that come along, even in environmentalism. If you look at all the effort now that goes into saving the environment, ideas often start off as unthinkable. So it was unthinkable to end the slave trade, unthinkable. Then it became radical. Once people start to say, no, we're doing it, we're going to try it, it becomes radical. Then if enough people join in, it becomes acceptable. Then as that message gets around, it becomes sensible. Then it becomes popular. Then it becomes policy. That's what we need to do with the end of abortion. We need to move abortion to become unthinkable. The end of abortion needs to become thinkable again. So it's radical just now. There are many people shared across our churches up and down the nation. There's enough of us to make it more acceptable and eventually to make it popular. And one of the ways, the keys that we have of doing that is understanding that every human being has a conscience. In a one-to-one conversation with people, they all have this voice inside them that can tell them what's right from wrong. Everyone has that, and we need to be a light to that conscience. And because there are already so many of us involved in the pro-life movement, I think that going from one person to the next person and just gradually aligning all of those who are involved in the various areas of the pro-life work, we can pull together a force that can change our current society's view on abortion. So just to finish, I say we need to repeat history. We need to be the William Wilberforces of our day. And if we can unite with others, if you can get others round about you, it can just be your family members, your friends. If we can unite all of these people together, the whispers that we have just over our kitchen, our dining tables, can be united to become a roar, really, that can waken up our world and can put it back on track. If we don't do it now, I'm afraid our society over the next couple of generations is looking pretty bleak. But it's something now I'm saying to the staff at SPUC, I'm in this to win it. I'm in this to turn it around, the position we're in just now, and make abortion unthinkable and lead all of the people involved in the pro-life movement to that end. Thank you. Okay, I think questions, yes. So if anyone has questions, I'm sure we can spend 10 or 15 minutes.
I think he was first, I think.
Yeah, it's Peter O'Connor. Right, Joe Biden is now contesting the Texas state 6-week abortion ruling. That was on the news yesterday. What's your view on that?
Sorry, do I have the question right? What is my view on the protecting?
President Joe Biden is now contesting the Texas state time limits.
Okay, yes.
That was on the news yesterday, so what's your view on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, Biden proclaims to be so the Texas ruling has restricted abortion. Yes, so it's restricted it considerably, which is a good thing, and Biden should be supporting that. So it's quite inconceivable to me why he would want to overturn that. Yeah, it's hard to understand, but we have this phenomenon today of many people who claim to be Catholics, but they do not hold Catholic views on things. So yeah. Is that okay? Sorry, I don't know if there's more you want me to say on it, but... Yes, I know, I've met him, yes.
He said a lot of these people go from bad to worse. he said it years ago with Joe Biden when he was starting out, you could probably reason with him.
Yeah.
But as time goes on, you're talking to a brick wall.
Yeah. No, I mean, I spent 16 years of my life as a lobbyist, so I know what it's like. I went to see Catholic politician after Catholic politician. All I can say is, at best, they find it extremely difficult to be brave. They find it extremely difficult to stand up for the values they supposedly privately profess. So no, it's not a surprise. I mean, Biden's position on abortion was quite clear before he stood for the presidency. So yeah, sorry I can't do anything about Biden, I'm afraid, but yeah, it's disappointing. It's very disappointing, but I'm afraid Alistair McIntyre has a wonderful book called After Virtue, and pretty much in it he says we have lost politics, the whole political establishment. He now says the barbarians are in charge, and they have been for a long time. So sadly they have rejected fundamental values of human rights and respecting human life. So yes, it's sad. Sorry I can't give you a happy conclusion to that. Bridget?
John, what is your feeling if a woman falls pregnant and then decides to adopt the baby out? How do you feel about encouraging adoption? I mean, I know what John Smeaton's idea was. Is yours the same, or is it different?
Yes, well, adoptions are not. If there are people in situations they cannot bring up, it just looks impossible for them to bring up a child. And offering that child up for adoption is I mean, I've got friends who were adopted, and one of them in particular, it's a very sad story because he later on looked into trying to track his mother down, and she sent a letter, and the letter was saying, you know, she'd handed him in, and she said, I've made a terrible mistake and I have my baby back. But it was too late, he'd already been adopted, you know, so, but he just says, I'm so thankful that she gave me birth. She at least didn't, you know, end my life, and she gave me the opportunity. I've had a wonderful life. So it's a wonderful opportunity to adopt it. What I would say for adoption is not to underestimate the psychological difficulty for a woman to give up her baby for adoption. Apparently, those who counsel them, for some of them, it feels like worse than abortion because they think there's an unknown out there. I'm losing this baby, and it's terrifying. It's going into the unknown. We're absolutely terrified of the unknown. So it's a challenge. So it's to support. If women could be supported, even if that has to be the decision, yeah, we need to support that because there's so many people out there desperate for a baby, and we're losing them. You know, so many every single day. We're losing 220,000 last year were killed. That's just absolutely incredible. Yet people are absolutely desperate for children. It just doesn't make sense. So yes, adoption is a wonderful alternative to abortion. Sir, at the back.
Give up child for to give up a child for adopt, but they don't know who's going to adopt that child, and whether it's going to be adopted by a homosexual couple or a lesbian couple. Is there any way of preventing that?
Well, my understanding is that someone is placing a child for adoption. They can make their views known, but I'm afraid there has been a push within the social work to prioritise same-sex couples to adopt. So I'm afraid that's the spirit of our age that we're up against. But I would say saving a life is a good thing to start with. Then try and put conditions on it, you know, to make sure that there is a principle in the social work that you should try and respect the values and the culture of the family from which they came. So if it were a Catholic family, they should be able to say, listen, it should be adoptive parents who are in sympathy, at least, or coherence with that set of values. There was someone else had a hand up.
Yeah, just three things. I'll be quick. First of all, I don't know if you must have probably seen on AWTN with that wonderful story of a mother whose survived. She didn't. I don't think she knew this, but the baby survived the abortion. She didn't know, and say I don't know, 30 years later they were reunited. She couldn't believe it. You know, she actually lived. I don't know what happened. Secondly, like my good friend reminded me, you can't be wholly Catholic and for abortion. It just, you know, I'm sure we all know. And thirdly, can we say the Angelus? It's 12 o'clock. You're the boss.
Okay, sorry, did you want me to comment on those? The first one, the adoption, well, that's good news, I'd say. Yeah, it's wonderful to know that you've given someone life instead of abortion.
Well, no, she survived the abortion.
Oh, sorry, she survived.
Yeah, she didn't realise that
yeah.
the baby, you know, went on living.
Yeah.
And she said, "What? You're my mum. I thought you had you aborted." She says, "No, mum. For some reason, she survived the abortion." You know.
Yeah. No, there was one of the competitors in the Paralympics was in that situation, I believe. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, sir.
This is a quick one. What would be SPUC's relationship with the other pro-life big organisation, Life?
Yeah, collaboration, I would say. So collaboration. I mean, Life have a particular niche where they provide support to women in crisis pregnancy. So yeah, we would happily, we do. It's usually calls come to our Arch helpline. So we will give them sort of immediate response, but very often we'll phone Life and try to get them to pick up and work on that. So yeah, it's collaboration, I'd say.
Is it collaboration at the top level, or is it just at the level of making the information known between the agencies?
Well, yes, I've still to go and meet Stephen, the CEO of Life. I met him when I took over as deputy CEO, and he's a very nice guy. So yeah, I'm very happy to work with him. I actually do quite a bit of work with one of the former directors of Life just now, and he's provided a lot of input to some of the thinking about how we operate at SPUC. So yeah, no, there's no impediments as far as I'm concerned for us collaborating at top and grassroots level.
I believe you go into schools to give talks to the children. What's their reaction? And I feel that to educate the children first, the young ones, the importance of life, so that they understand. And
Yeah.
so I think, you know, educating young people, because they're the ones that 16-year-olds that have abortions mostly. I think it's to go into the schools and to trying to make the children understand that life is important and every human right should be valued.
No, you're bang on. It's a bit easy in Scotland just now. So in Scotland, we've over the last few years, we typically speak to 15,000 pupils in schools. However, what I would say is don't underestimate how radically pro-abortion young children are in secondary schools. Now, some of the work we've piloted with primary schools is education packs that teach them about the development of the baby, and typically they're mesmerised, they love it. You know, so they learn that at 6 weeks in the womb, the babies will already get wee tiny fingerprints, so they all do wee games making their fingerprints and seeing what kind of fingerprints they've got. So we do sorts of things like that. That's one of the areas that we're going to be developing, try to get that out. So it doesn't mention abortion, it's nothing scary, it's the truth. And children can see the truth, and children are pro-life. As soon as you show, you know, we've got the models, Christine and Tom have got them next door, the fetal models. They get to see the fetal models, they see the beauty, it's a wee life there. So, but it doesn't take long after that for them to be radicalised. One of the pieces of research we did was we found that if people knew just 2 pieces of information about fetal development, it brought about a 30% swing on their views favourably on abortion. Just 2 pieces of information. So we've got a tiny feet pack, it's called, and the tiny feet pack teaches them hundreds of things about the development of the baby. So what we're hoping for is that will inoculate them against the tide, because that's what they're not thinking about the baby, they're just thinking, hey, I'm supposed to think that, oh, I better do it. And they're pro-abortion, and they're radical pro-abortion. But if they get that, that will inoculate some of them. And of course, that the youth, that we'll put a lot of effort into youth. We've got our youth conference is fantastic. We have a couple of hundred people come to that. We do events in universities. We have a group of young people who tour the country. We set up a pro-life stall. So they reach thousands of people on the street, but it also trains them. So typically we send out 30 young people. Those 30 young people get great training, great experience, and they go out into wider society and they grow the pro-life movement. That's the aim of it. So I'm very hopeful for what we're doing with young people at schools and children.
And also, I believe in prayer. I totally believe in prayer, and I feel that every church should have a group that will pray. The rosary is a powerful prayer.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Move mountains.
I mean, my view is ultimately this is it's a spiritual battle around us on that. So we do have it's not as developed as I would like it to be, but we do have a Prayer for Spuck social media platform. So we do have that. It goes out. We also have a newsletter for prayer that goes out. Usually it's mostly evangelicals, so it's not just Catholics who support Spuck, but prayer is important. And the thing about whatever people's faith are, I know as Catholics we particularly understand, we know the power of the rosary and Mass and all that, and being sustained in the spiritual life. We know how important that is. But this point I made about those who have another frame of reference from this culture, whatever their faith tradition is, all faiths around the world can recognise the dignity of the human person. So it gives us hope if we encourage them in their faith.
I mean, it will also be good if you target the teachers as well, because teachers are very instrumental, and also the education department to include in the syllabus, about the importance of life, so that they will include it as well in their curriculum, and then the teachers will also be faithful to that curriculum and to be able to, instruct the children, tell them the importance of life and how they can, the students will be able gradually be able to understand what it means. And then in social terms, because students, they have their peer groups. And when they are together, these are the sort of things they can discuss. And that will help them to understand. And then to avoid doing things that they shouldn't do at the very stage of their lives.
Thank you, Madam. Yes, I mean, one of the things we're trying to do is get in, we have developed relationships with certain dioceses around the country, and just to let them see what we've got. We do give talks, we bring teachers together, we show them what we have. So we have educational material, but we've got, again, another thing Tom's been working on is a pro-life drama. So we have been targeting, Tom is working around diocese by diocese to show them that is there. But yeah, it's getting them on board, so that is very much part of the vision that we want. In terms of people doing the right thing, yeah, one of the things we actually get asked to do a lot of talks on is chastity education. So we do have, we are developing that. We have a particular talk that's very popular, and it's called Reproductive Relationships. So we do a talk on that, and the youngsters are actually fascinated by it. So it's getting enough people trained up to be able to deliver it to meet the need. But yeah, in our age, youngsters are so damaged by, it's a shame, they think, wow, that looks amazing, and they don't realise how damaged they are, but even emotionally damaged. But the package that we are developing, this chastity, so we're probably going to set up an initiative called Love and Responsibility, but that's giving an alternative to help foster the values that lead to a pro-life culture. So yeah, it is one of the dimensions that we want to work on. Okay, thank you. everyone. It's been a pleasure to be here in Peterborough, and I'm delighted. Thank you to the Spuck branch here, to the Reverend Fathers for allowing me to be in the church today. So God bless you all, and I look forward to chatting to some of you next door.